Hello everyone, welcome to Clark Art Talks. I'm Kendra Larson. I'm the Archer Gallery Director here, and I just want to remind you, students, please, if you want to have your artwork in the Art Student Annual, today is the last day to drop off work in the gallery, so please do. Of course my phone name. Okay, so today we are very lucky to have Dan Attoe here to speak about his work. Originally from Bremerton, Washington, he lives in Camas now, so he's a local artist. He has had his work in the New York Times, as well as Art Review, Art Forum, and he's shown all over the country. And he went to UW-Madison. And I'm really excited to see his work and hear him speak about it, and I hope you are too. So let's give Dan a warm welcome.
All right, thank you. Hey folks, thanks for coming. My name is Dan Attoe. This is kind of exemplary of some of the work that I do, but I'm going to tell you a little bit how I got there and try to give you as much of the secrets I've found out about the art business. I've been showing around the world for the last 23 years. I was born in Bremerton, Washington, right as the Vietnam War ended. My dad left the Navy and joined the Forest Service, and we moved to Idaho. So I grew up largely in Idaho, deep far east, just below Yellowstone Park, and then up on the north shore of Lake Superior. So that's my dad in the center there. I'm the guy in the little denim shirt. Yeah, we're hairy folks. And this is my graduating class, 36 people. Not all of them were allowed to graduate, only 34 of us, because 2 guys got drunk on senior skip day. This is me. So when I was in high school, I started painting when I was 14. My folks got me acrylic paints. And this is an example of what I was doing then. I used to have these panic attacks. I was kind of a wound-up kid, and I'd have these hallucinations. Oftentimes, as I was falling asleep, things would get really big and really small. You have a question?
What's with that picture of you in the Kermit?
That's just me in high school. I had a jacket with patches and stuff all over it, and instead of a back patch, I put Kermit the Frog on there. But this is the kind of stuff I was doing. The places that I grew up, art wasn't really considered a serious option for something to do when you got out of high school. So I went to school and I studied psychology. And that, I guess, ties to this, I think. And I did that for 3 years, and what I found, I wrote and conducted an experiment on the effects of music on mood and art judgment, and I was serving on on another research team. We were studying depth perception in two-dimensional space. I was teaching for United Cerebral Palsy. I was also working at a window factory. This is something, at some point, I was just pushing myself so hard because I loved to paint. So I'd work all day, I'd do my psych work, and then I'd come home and I'd paint. And the people that I would hang out with were a lot of people from the art department. And at some point, I just kind of realized that I needed to make a decision because I couldn't do both of these things entirely. And so I decided to focus on art. I dropped the psych, but I decided to use my art as a psych experiment, and I started doing a painting a day. And I did that for 7 years, almost 7 years, 6.5, 6 3/4 years. And that's when I started showing around the world. And how I approached this as a psych experiment, I didn't really understand when I was an undergrad why I felt more excited and more drawn to making art than I did to studying psychology. I'd often have to write papers and be falling asleep, but if I had to do an all-nighter with art, I could easily stay up all night. And so I started thinking about what it was that really held my attention when I was making art. And these are some things that I've found, these kind of different pockets of information that I think are in all art, and things that pull us to art that aren't necessarily just about art. And for me, it was, of course, about psychology, but I think some people's work is about history. Some people are more interested in culture. That would be anthropology. Some people approach art from a philosophical point. Some people have sociological interests. And then a lot of people, I think all art has all of these things, but some people are just purely interested in ontology, like how things work. Like if you're a welder, if you're making, how does the metal weld together? What do the colors look like when you're done? So at first I couldn't afford canvases every day, so I was kind of painting on whatever was around. And this was back in 1997 when I started this project. And Kendra said it briefly. I started school in Wisconsin. I started college in Wisconsin at a community college in Wausau, Wisconsin. And then I went down to Madison. So every day I would go into the studio. I'd usually prime something the night before. Sometimes they were canvases, but sometimes beer bottles. There was a couple doors that I found that I put gesso on. And early on, there wasn't really one thing I was drawn to. So some days there'd be something like this. And those shadows under there are painted. They're not actual shadows. But those little knob things are three-dimensional. They kind of poke out. So sometimes I would just build the paint up. Sometimes it was purely just about color. I was really just trying to figure out, for me, the project was about painting whatever held my attention the most that day, whatever I was drawn to the most each day. And there were a lot of things that, text started showing up very early on. To me, that wasn't, this is a flat surface. Text is something that can go on a flat surface. These were just as influenced by album covers and rock band posters and T-shirts. Early on, there was a lot of cartoon type things. Eventually, these are daily paintings. So, and a lot of these I would have a job and I would come home and I would paint. These are from, after I graduated college, I went to work at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis. And I had a small apartment, and so I couldn't just gesso whatever was laying around for very long because it was filling up my apartment. Luckily, I worked at the wood shop at the Walker, or I had access to it, and they had all this MDF, and I would cut little tiny slices out of the MDF. This is kind of postcard size. I think this is, or maybe this one's 7 inches by 7 inches. Some are 5 by 7. And so this one's 7 by 7. Gradually, I never wanted to be a landscape painter growing up. I was into punk rock and skateboarding, even though I lived way out in the middle of nowhere often, on ranger stations or in these little towns. But what I found is I kept doing this, and adhering to the project as well as I could. The things that held my attention the most was what I wanted to paint. It just gradually became more and more landscape painting. And I think it was just because of the way that I grew up, and I really just couldn't help kind of attaching meaning to landscape and figure, and you know, they're not always landscape and figurative. And this guy, so when I was in graduate school, I took 3 years and worked at this museum in Minneapolis. And I started showing around the Midwest, Chicago, Madison. I had galleries in both places. Eventually, I got picked up by this guy. He was in Los Angeles, and he just was starting a brand new gallery there. I showed with him for 18 years, so he represented me early on, but he picked me up while I was still in graduate school. And I don't think any of us knew how big he was going to get, but eventually he expanded from Los Angeles to New York to Berlin. I was traveling from, after I graduated graduate school, I moved to Washougal. I had a friend there who was a shepherd, that guy I knew from Wisconsin. And I would fly from Washougal to London, to Berlin, Copenhagen, Italy, Spain. Just, that was a regular thing. This guy was my gallerist, and he kind of cultivated this. We all did. All the artists in his stable kind of cultivated this gallery that was kind of this troublemaking, mischief-making gallery. We were all pretty rowdy. And eventually, when James Franco decided he was going to be an artist, he approached this, he started showing with my gallery. So I was still just doing these small paintings, you know, kind of all over the map. Text, I honestly can't remember what a lot of these say. If I remember what the text is, I'll tell you. This is a little blurry. Nothing fucking changes. You know, sometimes, like, I knew a guy like that, you know, in Idaho, a friend of mine. You know, a lot of these were people that I grew up with. I was using as characters. No one can hear your sound. You want a soda pop. Oh shit, this lady's realizing she just died, I think. These characters. The Midwest is full of these like big fiberglass and cement animals. There's David Lee Roth on stage. For those of you who don't know, he's from Van Halen. Kurt Cobain. A lot of these, and this guy, I mean, this painting of Kurt Cobain, I would look at pictures, you know, but he's probably, this is a 7-inch by 7-inch painting. He's probably the length of the tip of my pinky finger, so tiny, tiny. Because I was working so small and doing these every day, I had to gradually kind of figure out how to paint super tiny. I have brushes with like 4 hairs in them now. We all have rich lives. My grandparents were farmers in Wisconsin, and I kind of grew up helping out on the farm. So a lot of subject matter is farm stuff from the Midwest too. Well, I'm obviously not going to show you everything. This is the first one I did when I moved out here. First daily painting. To me, that was capturing. I was living in a cabin on the Washougal River. I'm in your head. When my dad worked for the Forest Service, he also worked as a firefighter. So he was a scientist. He had a degree in earth science. My mother had a degree in journalism, but usually worked as a librarian. But my dad would also, in the summers, he'd go fight fires for the Forest Service. A lot of these, you know, you can see like the influence of these places that I've lived, these beautiful places that I've lived, but also horror movies, that disembodied head, and Where my folks live now in central Wisconsin, the lakes freeze over, and these people put screws and nails through their tires, and they go out and they race on the ice in the winter. It gets so thick. I've been out, I've watched them. It's kind of terrifying because you do kind of wonder if the ice is just going to snap. Stop acting like a television show. Here I go. You know. This was the first painting. After almost 7 years, I stopped doing a painting a day because these were starting to take, you know, I'd be painting 10 to 14 hours a day. I do an underpainting and then do the color, mix all the colors and then apply the color all in one day. So at some point I was like, all right, I'm gonna just let them take 2 or 3 days if they need to now. This is like a 2-day painting. And it really messed with me after 7 years of doing that. It says down there, there's going to be a stab. There's going to be a stabbing. But once I stopped doing the daily paintings, I still kind of needed that immediacy and the flexibility, that sort of the disposable quality, because a lot of my daily paintings were terrible. You know, you can't do something great every day. And it didn't matter because there were so many of them. So they would just go in a box, go in the dump, give them to friends, whatever. They wouldn't make it to galleries. But I still needed that quality so that I could feel comfortable still taking these risks that I felt like were ways for me to access information. So I started doing these little drawings every day while I would do my painting. So in the mornings, I sit down or I would sit down and do these little, like one of those little squares is a morning, you know, and then I draw cartoons and write text. And because of this, like a daily painting, I might just put one line, but here I've got like 5 or 6 lines a day, you know, of text. So the text kind of blossomed as a result of this. Here's a detail of this one. Let's see if I can even, it's hard to read from over here. Who knows what's on the other side? Times are hard, the forest floor. That's a picture of Tycho Brahe, the astronomer up there. He used to do fencing, and somebody cut off his nose, so he had a brass nose. Part of the project of this, an important aspect of this for me in saying, okay, I'm going to make something new every day, is also finding something new to paint that's not going to bore me. If I do the same thing over and over, I will get bored and I'll lose interest in it. So over the years, that's meant finding things in the world to bring to the work. Just like if somebody's like, well, I'm going to paint a puppy every day, you start noticing things on puppies that you never noticed. You know? If your subject matter is like whatever is out there, part of my project is like finding things to bring. And there was a while where I was really interested in astronomy. I had all these telescopes and studied the history of it a little bit. This one, this is like one of a million things I want to show you. Ozzy Osbourne's television agent bought that, and he had me over to his house in Los Angeles. This says, I make most of this shit up down there at the bottom. So for me, it's also important. I'm not looking at photographs when I do these. I occasionally use photographs as reference, just the way a writer would use a dictionary. So if I'm like, well, I got to make a deer head or something, okay, I'll look one up on the internet. But these are, you know, made up from stories and whatever, you know. Here I looked up a picture of a semi, you know. What we know as kids is all we ever know. all we ever will know. This one is pretty heavily based on Washougal. They're not always so clear. Here's Slayer. They got their tour bus stuck on the ice. A lot of like exploring childhood interests too, because for some reason, for a long time, that's where the honest energy was, you know, like these old bands that I used to love. But here I had just gotten back from England. I had a show in London, and while I was there, these bombs went off and the whole city shut down. The subway was bombed and a couple buses were bombed. The day before, the morning of that my show was supposed to open, so I didn't even make it to my own opening. I just wandered around London, completely shut down. And when I got home, I went for a hike, and I had gotten this Motorhead England shirt when I was over there. This one's pretty directly based on a bar that I used to hang out at in Washougal. Summer has slipped away. You know, there's often these kind of surreal or magical elements. I kind of, people say my work is surrealist. I don't think of it that way, as Cop is saying, "Are you okay?" For me, it's more like short stories. It's like writing fiction. I think surrealism, everything is twisted and kind of, you know, for me, occasionally there's like magical elements, but that doesn't, surreal just never felt like the right term. That's Mariah Carey. This guy fell through the ice, and Mariah Carey is materializing in the sky. Birth control pills. This is, for a long time, because I still needed to think of my paintings as part of an installation, I would write things and draw things on the wall around them when I would exhibit. And I made these tents for a while. I've always made sculpture. That's one of the daily drawings in there. At this show, this was in Berlin, they had a sort of an extra space in the gallery, and they're like, what are we going to do with that space? And because I had all these well, it's hard to see. This is a daily drawing thing there. As I was doing these little daily drawings, more and more these like kind of cartoonish things would start to appear around them. I wasn't just doing the little finished kind of tonal drawings in the text. And I didn't really know what to do with those cartoons, how to really use them in my work other than in the drawings. And so I said, well, let's take some of my cartoons and make like neon bar signs, and we'll make a bar in the gallery space. And so they turned a couple of my paintings into these giant light boxes, and then they took some of my little cartoonish drawings and made these, kind of making fun of like a beer sign you'd see in a bar, you know, except it says you have more freedom than you're using, you know. And that was in 2006. And this one also became a light box, so did that one. And this is, later that year, the gallery said, let's just do a show that's entirely neon, so I did that. This one, emotional problems don't mean shit. There's electricity in here. So this was in Los Angeles. They kind of built out the space to look like a bar with these like wood paneling. You know, I'm going to kind of pick it up because I'm looking at the time here. This is an example of an underpainting, like what's under the first layer of paint in a lot of these paintings. So, and then this is what that one looks like at the end. Just show you again. And you can see subject matter is still kind of all over the place. But I'm looking at a lot of different art and artists and traveling the world and kind of more and more thinking about too, like what am I bringing to the rest of the world? And as I was traveling, people love stories of America, you know, and like rural America, because it's kind of novel. It's like, you know, people in Denmark don't know, but they hear, you know, Bruce Springsteen and Willie Nelson songs about rural America. And so the stories that I had from my youth kind of became currency of, you know, this is actually my second catalog. This one came out in 2009. This thing is right there. I didn't do that on purpose, but I'm going to be gentle from now on. Welcome to Dum Dum Land. It's bullshit. You know, all over the place. But as I'm going more and more, I've gotten more particular about how the paint is applied, and I didn't intend for that to happen, but that's kind of what's happened. I'll still use it looser sometimes. And there's like a year or two where I did like a series of swimming pools and surfers and waterfalls. It's okay, you can look at me all you want. You know, there's still a lot of text in these. This one's like a foot by a foot. This one's like 5 feet by 3 feet, I think. Still little silver text. For me, it's still, that's sort of my rebellion against painting landscapes, is I'm going to disrupt them with these little characters doing irreverent things, and there's going to be text, you know. I can't completely relax into this direction that my interests have really, you know, and sometimes I'll do these this is really drippy, washy paint. Here's another, this one's like 5 feet by 3 feet. This is a foot by foot. At this point now, I left that gallery in Berlin 3 years ago after 18 years, and I'm showing with a gallery in Miami and one in New York. And I've had this gallery in Chicago now for like 24 or 5 years, I can't remember. So that's kind of where I show now. This one's called Escape from Women's Prison. I've escaped from the women's prison. I gotta read this to you, I'm sorry. To wander through the swamp, to look for the spark that got me there in the first place. This was the first one I did during COVID. When COVID hit, I had just gotten certified as a tattoo artist, because when you're an artist, when you're a professional artist, you kind of end up having to find other things to do to fill in the gaps when you're not having shows. And I had an old buddy who'd been tattooing for years, and he just taught me, and I worked at his shop. And as soon as I was certified, COVID shut everything down. And when I came back, I just opened my shop in my studio. In my dream, I kill a snake. You know, there's no like one. At this point, you know, for a while, I would kind of find new things to paint by partying, going out in the woods, hanging out with people. At this point, I meditate every day, and it doesn't always bring something, but I started studying Zen meditation in like 1999 while I was working at the Walker Art Center. And I've just kept it up, and usually something useful shows up. This one I did for a cover of an album. One of my collectors, his name is Randall Poster. He does the music for Wes Anderson and Martin Scorsese films, but he also put out this project a couple of years ago, and there are hundreds of musicians. The album that this is the cover for has like Nick Cave and Yoko Ono and one of the Beastie Boys and Karen O on it, and then I think there were like 10 other albums. These little glowing people. You know, we're coming up. These are all kind of in the last couple of years, and because the galleries don't always let me draw on the walls anymore. All the paintings, I'll write little stories. I just love the idea of someone getting these and having like some keys, some little clues. Usually when I have these images in my head, even though they're fictional, I kind of have an idea of where in the country they are. I've traveled the country a lot of times, and then growing up with my parents, moving around the country. So, you know, I might say, you know, this is in Minocqua, Wisconsin. This one actually looks pretty close to near where I live in Washougal. You know, Denver, north of Denver, you know. And then I'll tell little stories sometimes. This says, I like the way the clouds move. And so these are all small. This is like 7 inches by 7 inches. So these little people and these little parasols and stuff are just, they're like the size of a tiny little spider. And this, like a tire shop, but there's some issues with the perspective here. But for me, I guess this is where the difference is between, people always ask me if I paint from photographs. For me, that's not interesting. I could go to a tire store, get a photograph, or I could, you know, look up online like security camera from a tire store. For me, it's more interesting, and this ties to that whole list of things that I showed you at the beginning, the philosophy and the psychology of it. It's more interesting, like, what does a person think that people look like standing around in a tire store? You know, that's more interesting to me. And that's what I want to show, you know. This one was just in the Dallas Art Fair. I just drove down there because I pushed right up until the ship date, you know. I was like, went past, kind of a perfectionist. These little people going into a magic door here on this one. Also went to Dallas just, when was that? Middle of last month, so I drove down there. Here's a recent neon. This one, my gallery in New York had this one made for a show. And I showed you one of these at the very beginning, so I'm going to talk about these a little bit now. I call these accretion paintings. So early on in the daily painting process, I started realizing I actually also want to make paintings with other paintings on top of them. And so, even though I didn't show you until now, while I was doing daily paintings, I also had a large painting next to me that I was adding something to every day. This was the first one. This is from, or one of them. I can't even remember. And then this was the first one I did when I moved out here in 2004. And then I made this one. So these have these little paintings. All those little paintings are probably about 2 inches, 2 to 3 inches. So here's an upside down heavy metal band. You know, this one has like this guy screaming from the stage, but also like a peaceful little deer. Get your shit together. People whisper about you. You know. The subject matter is all over. When I also drove up and set up, because I learned in college, in graduate school, I studied plein air painting. I was a teacher there who taught that kind of thing. So I drove up This is from the scene from the beginning of Twin Peaks. I drove up to that falls, which is a couple hours north of here. Here's Chris Farley. And this is a tiny, this is like the size of your fingernail painting of Judas Priest. I did the same thing, the Timberline Lodge, which of course was used in The Shining, and that was the composition they used in The Shining. Here, this one's some more details here from this painting. And here's the police. They finally showed up. And then here's another one. And this one, you can kind of tell, like at this time, I was really getting into astronomy, going out with my telescope every night and looking at the sky. And that was such a great thing. I mean, I've done it, kind of went through a birding phase too. I still love birds, but you can see how astronomy really is falling into the subject matter a lot here. One object blocking light, like there's Sid is eclipsing Nancy here. But for me, that was about, you know, I think I was like 32 or something at that point, going through life. For 32 years, I'd just kind of taken the sky for granted, the night sky for granted, but once you see it through a telescope, once you identify the planets, you'll never see it the same again. It broadens your understanding of something that's been in the background, you know. Here's a more recent one. This one's from like 2 years ago. There's Cheech and Chong by that water slide there. You know, I've got 2 kids now, so there's a lot of like kid-related subject matter showing up in rainbows. Because they're both girls, so everything, with one of them, everything's rainbows. The other one has finally found classic rock, which is awesome. Have a nice whatever. This is a show or a biennial I was in at the Portland Art Museum. This was a museum show in Spain. This is a neon that's in a nightclub, a swanky nightclub in Manhattan. Somebody just sent me a picture. It's been up there for 12 years. I've only been there once, and they gave me free scotch all night. But every once in a while, people will send me pictures of themselves with this. Like, hey, I saw your neon online or whatever. And I also started doing these fake neon paintings. These are some sculptures that I do with my kids. About 12 years ago, boy, no, I'm getting old. 15 years ago now, a fashion designer from New York who collects my work showed up, decided he wanted to do a line of clothing together. That was from a GQ article. These guys from GQ came out, took pictures of me riding around in Washougal. I went to Paris, walked the runway, came down, met Drake, hung out with David Blaine. And this kind of continued for like a year. There's me right before getting on the runway. They gave me these like Bigfoot hands. Here's another Northwest artist. He's from Tacoma. What's his name? Oscar Tuazon. He's Eli Hansen's brother. He just happened to be living in Paris at the time, so they invited him to be a model in the show. This is an example of like, if you come to my tattoo shop, I do flash. These are based on my daily drawings, obviously. Only a few people have really come out for that kind of work. Most people show up and they want, you know, like whatever, knives and skulls and bouquets of flowers. Here's one I did of myself so that I could show people, you know. I also wrote this horror novel. The whole time I was in college, I studied writing just as much as I studied sculpture. When I was in Iowa, I took courses through the Writer's Workshop. My last teacher was a Pulitzer Prize winner. I didn't know it at the time. I found out 20 years later. So I felt like a little bit of a goof. But for years, I wanted to write a book about my experience in the art business and art theory, you know, that a little bit more expanding on that list that I showed you at the beginning. That, and this came out 2 years ago. You get it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. This is a recent daily drawing collection. I call these accretion drawings. I think it's number 81 or 82 from like 2 years ago. I'm just going to show you some of these details so you can see it's not all brilliant, you know. I can't even find an axe to grind. Maybe it doesn't exist. Milkman, Wolf Dog, you know, I mean, that's like a day. That's kind of embarrassing, but like that, you know. At this point, I do them kind of at the end of the day when everybody else has gone to sleep. You know, I have kids. It's like maybe 10 or 11 at night that I'll finally get out in the garage. You know, here I'm kind of making fun of that John Lennon Imagine drawing. You know, and I put this, I don't care about AI, Grandpa. You want to think each generation gets better. And I just wanted to read this because I think this kind of sums up my project. You know, if this is all that's left, I did this to leave a trail so you'd feel less lonely. I was a person who felt some of the same things that you do, and made many mistakes, more than most people. I love you. If I pretended to be strong or really cool or right all the time, that would be of no help, and it would be a lie and a disappointment. So at this point, part of this project is kind of to reflect my own development. Having done this now for almost 30 years, this daily project. And having kids, I also go in, when I do these daily drawings, I'm thinking about them. And these drawings largely sit, they don't get shown a lot. But so this, you know, I think this one went to New York. It's rare that they do, but this one went to New York, so some other people saw this. But that kind of summarizes my project nicely, I think. So this is the last slide. You know, pretty easy. I guess if there's any questions.